Well, thanks for being here today. And you're going to, in a few minutes, hear an incredible story of God's grace. And without further ado, would you welcome Misty Wallace as she comes?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Misty Wallace. I work here in the city as I work with a ministry called Bridges to Life. So I work inside the prison system, and we're always looking for volunteers. So if anyone would like to come into prison and work, we're in Miami Correctional Monday. Tuesday, we are at Plainfield Correctional. Wednesday, we are in the Indiana Women's Prison, which is really close to here. And Thursday, we are in the IREF facility, downtown Indianapolis, the reentry facility. During my process of life, I've been in nursing for 18 years. Probably about 4 years ago, my life changed forever. I started doing ministry inside the prison system, and I'll start off, it's a 14-week program that we do. We bring victims into prison to speak in front of offenders. And I was that person that received the phone call and said, will you come in prison and speak? And I said, absolutely not. No way possible. I'm not going to do that. But I did. 2 weeks later, God said, yes, you will. And I listened. So I went into prison. I now run a program here regionally in the Indianapolis area. And on week 10, I get to share my story. And that's the forgiveness week of the program inside the prison system with the inmates, the women and the men. But today I'm going to share with you what I share in prison on week 10. And that is on October 18th, 1992, I was a senior in high school. And I am in the Ben Davis area. But I am going to tell you guys, I graduated from Decatur Central. And I was a senior October 18th, 1992. I was out with some friends on the west side of Indianapolis. We were out haunted housing, southwest side, Greenwood area. My boyfriend and I had gotten into an argument that evening, and we parted ways. So I dropped him off at his house, and I continued up Kentucky Avenue, pulled into a Burger King restaurant in the Marwood Plaza area. The drive-thru was open, the inside area was closed, so I went through the drive-thru, seen a friend of mine that was going through. He waved me on, let me go ahead of him. I waved to him, said thank you, ordered a drink, pulled around the front of the building. There was a payphone, because believe it or not, 23 years ago, we didn't have cell phones either. So when I pulled around the front of the Burger King, I pulled into the parking spot where there was the payphone. I got out, I called my parents' house to let them know that I was going over to a friend's house, that I wouldn't be home. They didn't answer, they were sleeping. So I called my boyfriend, and I said, hey, don't call and wake up my mom and dad. I'm going over to a friend's house. As I was saying that, I looked over my shoulder, and I noticed that a car had pulled into the front of the Burger King rest area there. And he pulled up to the front door. The car pulled to the front door. And a gentleman exited the passenger car side of the car that night. He walked towards the back end of my car. He looked at me and he said, how long are you going to be? And I looked at him and I said, just a few minutes. My boyfriend said, who's that? I said, someone that wants to use the payphone. He said, okay, call me later. As soon as I hung up the phone, I turned to go get back in my car. I was shot in the face. The bullet went through my left cheek, down through my esophagus, severed my carotid artery, bounced up, broke my top 2 vertebrae of my neck, and stayed lodged in between my vertebrae and the muscle in my neck. My body automatically went into shock. My head landed underneath the front tire of my vehicle. As I was laying there, I was still conscious. My body was in shock, so I was in and out of consciousness, but I knew what was going on around me. I noticed that when I came to, my head was so lodged underneath the front tire of my car, all I could think about was, please, God, don't let this car start. A few seconds later, I noticed that he had gotten into my vehicle, in which I left my car keys in the ignition and my purse on the seat. And all I could do was pray, please, God, don't let this car start. A few seconds later, he walked away. As he was walking away, I said, please help me. And he left me there to die. He walked away. A gentleman that was working at Rolls-Royce that night was on a shift running a special part for Saudi Arabia, testing jet engines parts that they brought over with some. He was on a shift he wasn't even supposed to be working. Left when he wasn't supposed to. Turned left instead of turning right like he always does. Came up Kentucky Avenue, seen my body laying on the ground. Thought it was very odd. Was able to pull in and point his lights on me as I was laying on the ground. He came up to me. At that point, I had gotten my body turned over. I don't know how. I don't remember how. But at that point, I was laying on my back, and I was gurgling in my own blood. As I was laying there, he rolled me over on my side. He happened to be a certified EMT, Vietnam vet, and a pastor in his church. And he promised me he wouldn't leave my side until the paramedics got there. Wayne Township pulled up. I remember it was chaotic. I was in and out of consciousness. They put me on a stretcher. I had this big shock suit on. Very bumpy ride up Kentucky Avenue to Wishart Hospital. Chaotic. The EMTs were sticking needles in my arms, my chest. It was getting harder for me the closer I got to the hospital. It was getting harder to breathe. I remember going into a deep sleep a few times. I woke up and I was inside the hospital area. It was very chaotic, very chaotic. Nurses and doctors running around everywhere. And detective walked in. I couldn't speak to him because the bullet had gone through my esophagus, so he was trying to ask me some questions if I knew who did this to me. Did I know them? And we were playing the squeeze game. I went in for some testing. They found out that the bullet was still in my neck, lodged in the back of my, next to my vertebrae. It had broke the top two vertebrae, and that those spinal fragments were now in my spinal fluid. And that if I lived through surgery, they told my parents that I probably wouldn't walk because of the spinal, the bones being in the spinal fluid. I think the hardest part through that whole process was I was in a small room, and I was getting ready to go into surgery, and they brought my mom and dad, my two brothers, and my sister, and my grandparents, and to say goodbye to me. And at that point, in that small room, I knew I was really bad. I knew that I wasn't going to come out of surgery. The chaplain came in with my parents. They said a prayer. Rushed me into surgery. Several hours later, I came out of surgery. I had vascular surgeons, ear, nose, and throat surgeons. You name it, I had them. I woke up on a ventilator in a drug-induced coma. I had to have a bypass carotid graft where they took vein out of my thigh, repaired the artery in my neck. They left the bullet in, which also did not help me as a senior in high school with a full ride scholarship to play softball, because I lost that scholarship because I had a bullet in my neck for 2 years after. I did graduate high school that year. I got married. But before I got married, I was probably out of the hospital exactly 1 month to the day. That day, I decided I was going to go visit my grandfather, who was terminally ill. Got in my car. I'd been cooped up in the hospital in the house. I'd went home, recovering. I had to learn how to speak, chew, move my whole face, muscles. I was in therapy 3 times a week just for that. Trying to finish high school. I was a senior. Visit my grandpa On the way over there, I came to the corner of Vermont and Lyndhurst. As I was sitting at the stoplight, my boyfriend had taken me, and we were in my car. My car that had to be towed from the crime scene because the starter went out that night. We got it back, and it was fixed, so he's like, I'll get you out of the house for a little bit, and we'll go see your grandfather. Went to see my grandfather, and when I came to the stoplight, I looked up, and I was face to face with a car that was pulled into the Burger King rest area that night. And I looked at my boyfriend, I said, that's him. That's the car. That's him driving the car that shot me. And he said, are you sure? And I said, absolutely. He turned, pulled into the gas station. We followed him, wrote down the license plate number, went to my grandfather's house. I was nervous. I was trying to call my detective, and I don't know if you guys remember, 23 years ago, they also had rotary phones. Well, my grandfather still did. And when you're scared and nervous and you're trying to make an important phone call to your detective, I think I dialed the phone at least 15, 20 times before I could get it to go through. He was out of town, my detective was that day. He was picking up another person that was in Missouri on a murder charge and bringing him back to Indiana. Another detective went to the house the next morning. They arrested him. Guess what? He said, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. You got the wrong person. Was I surprised? No. That led to a jury trial. A very hard 2 days. 2 days of being shot all over again. Sitting outside the courtroom was torture. I testified the first day about halfway through the day. His family made sure to make sure it was totally miserable for me the whole time. As they walked out of the courtroom, I was a horrible person. Why are you doing this to my brother? He didn't do this to you. You got the wrong person. Why would you do this to someone? I made it through that 2 days. 11 o'clock in the evening, after 11:30 that evening, the jury came back in, and they were hung 11-1. At 11:30 at night, the second day. The judge said, no, go back in. Well, eventually, a little after midnight, they came back with a conviction. He was guilty. He got attempted murder, carrying a handgun in the state of Indiana without a license. They threw out robbery because they never found my purse, and they threw out auto theft because he never got my vehicle. I eventually got married a short time later, moved to California. I wasn't here when he was sentenced, but he was looking at about 120 years. He got sentenced to 20 years for those 2 crimes. I remember getting the phone call from my dad, and he wanted me to sound so good. He wanted it to sound so good. He got 20 years. But really, that's not what he felt. But he wanted me to be comfortable. He wanted me to feel safe where I was. I was now living 2,000 miles away in California. My husband was in the military. He was away for a couple weeks. I started having panic attacks, post-traumatic stress syndrome. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I was going through. I found myself in the ER 5 nights out of the week. Finally, they gave my husband an honorable discharge from the United States Navy to come back so I can heal correctly. Moved back to Indianapolis. Started living life, went back to school, did some schooling, just raising a family. And one day I got a letter from the Department of Corrections. Actually, eight years later, I was back home. It said my offender was being released. I was mad. I was really mad. Confused. Didn't understand. He was looking at 120 years. He got 20 and he did 8. I wanted answers. Called downtown to the Department of Corrections. They told me he did his time. He did his time. Okay. But I still don't feel safe. What's he been doing while he's been in prison? Is he going to come out and finish me? Because he didn't do it the first time? I don't know any of this. We're not allowed to know. Eventually, I finally got a hold of someone at the Department of Corrections. They said, oh, you can file for a restraining order. But that don't really, I mean, he's been incarcerated for 8.5 years. It doesn't really. I filed for the restraining order because that's the only option I had. And the whole time of processing this, I was just trying to protect my family. But really, I wasn't thinking that I had to go back to court. Well, I got a court date. Went to court that day. My youngest brother met me. Went into the courtroom downtown, Marion County Courthouse, downtown Indianapolis. And I don't know if you've ever been in there. But if you go down into the basement for a restraining order, you have to go through the courtroom, and it's been many years, so it's probably not there anymore. I don't know. But you used to have to go down in the basement. I remember being so physically ill that I even had to go back to court. And this was just for a restraining order. But I knew I had to come across face to face with him again. My brother said, you're going to be okay. I came out of the restroom. I had been getting sick. Came out of the restroom. I remember laying my head up against the brick wall just to cool down. My brother said, I'm going to grab a candy bar. I haven't had lunch, and I think this is going to take a while. He walked over to the snack machine, and when I looked up, my offender was walking towards me in the hallway. And he walked right up to me, and he asked me where the courtroom was. And I pointed down the hallway. And I looked over at my brother. His face was purple. And I walked over to him. I said, let's go. I don't want to be here. He said, what? I go, let's go. I don't want to be here. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, he doesn't even know what I look like. He doesn't even know who I am. I said, let's go. He said, no. We're going to stay right here. I'm going to be right by your side, and we're going to get through this together. We did. He stayed right by my side. 5 hours later, I was the last person to be called up. The judge granted the restraining order for a year, which never happens, but it did. As I was walking out of the courtroom, I turned to open the door. I tried to stay focused on the judge most of the time, and I knew my brother was right behind me. Tried to stay focused. As soon as I opened the door and started walking out of the courtroom, I heard my offender say, Your Honor, can I say something to Miss? As soon as Miss came out of his mouth, my brother erupted in the courtroom. He said, keep your mouth shut. Don't talk to my sister. There's nothing that you can absolutely say that will ever make this right. Don't talk to my sister. They took him off to a room. They took us off, let us leave. But as a victim, and if you're a victim, you always want to know why. That never goes away. Never. Why did you choose me? Why me? Several years after that had gone by, he never bothered me. Started having more kids, living life. Ended up going through a dark time in my life, actually. Went through a horrible divorce. First time living by myself. I had 2 kids now, trying to support. I was working 2 jobs. Very depressed. Divorce wasn't a good ending. My niece was watching my kids as I was working 2 jobs in the evening time. Went to work one Monday morning. My house was robbed by drug dealers that knew my niece. Had been in my house and knew what I had, so they took everything I had. It just kept getting darker and darker and darker. I always say that I think I was in prison a lot longer than my offender was. Picked myself up, started going, living life. Just decided one day I was going to Google his name. I was sitting at the hospital working one day, and I can do that and not get in trouble for it. I Googled his name, typed it in, and this picture popped up. He was in this picture. But this picture made me really, really mad. He was getting an award from the Department of Corrections. My shooter was getting an award from the Department of Corrections. I was so mad. I was emailing my brothers, emailing my sister, sending it off to my dad. I decided I was going to write the governor. Someone was going to give me answers of why he was getting an award. No one must not have knew what he did. And I was just going to let them know how I felt about that. They sent me back an email, and they said, "What are you talking about? What article are you talking about?" And I was so mad I forgot to send it, the PDF. I was just so angry. I responded, and I sent it back to them. Guess what? They didn't respond back to me. So still wondering why. Why on October 18th, 1992, did you choose me? I went to Facebook, and I know everybody knows what Facebook is. I was sitting in practice. My daughter was inside practicing soccer one night. I was sitting in my car, and I knew I was at a point in my life that I needed to forgive. I wasn't sure how. I, that night, looked up my offender on Facebook, and he was on there, and that picture popped up again. Not the same one, but a different one. It had him and his wife and his 4 kids. I hit the message button because I knew nobody at that point could tell me no, besides him. I wrote him a message that day, and I said, "I know you know who I am. I don't want to fight. There's nothing to argue about. I have chosen to forgive you, but I do have questions that I need answered. Some closure questions, if you would be willing to help me with that, to give me my closure so I can move on with my life. It doesn't mean that I will ever forget what happened to me on October 18th, 1992, but I learned how to forgive and to move on with my life." He responded to me and gave me his phone number. That's when my journey continued, and the journey I'm still on today. And he's going to share with you right now, because my shooter, my friend, Keith Blackburn, is here with us. And he is also a chaplain with the Indiana Department of Corrections.
God had to reach way down in the gutters of the west side of Indianapolis to pick me up. Grew up on the west side, started getting in trouble at 13, petty stuff, stealing, 14, breaking into houses, burglaries, auto thefts. 15, started drinking. 16, started doing LSD. Got involved in gangs, got involved in drive-bys, was doing everything I thought I was tough enough to do. And Halloween of 1991, I decided I was going to make a pact with the devil. I was going to make a covenant, so I had some rituals out of a witchcraft book that I'd memorized. I went to the park. I sacrificed a black cat, took the blood, cut myself, mixed my own blood, vowed to serve the devil for the rest of my life, give my life to Satan to do his will. Living in a real dark place, called myself the boogeyman, tried to be dark, tried to just stare at things and be able to stare through things and just trying to be dark. I was trying to be evil. I was making myself evil. 17 was LSD drinking, more of the same. 18, I'm out. We were going to do a robbery, and I'd messed my knee up, so I was waiting knee surgery. I couldn't run. I was going to go rob a store, but we needed a car that we could get and do the robbery and throw the car away. So we was driving around Indianapolis looking for a car, any car, and found one at the Burger King parking lot. Drove in. I got out of the vehicle I was in, walked up to the back. You heard the story. I was looking to see if the keys was in the ignition, and they was. As I was getting ready to go around to get the car, she turned and she looked at me. You heard her story. And my mind was thinking already beyond that point. I was thinking of the robbery I was going to commit, and I didn't want to leave any witnesses. So I pulled a gun out, put it to her head, and I pulled the trigger. Once you do something like that, you can never undo it. You can never undo some of the choices we make. Her body fell. I didn't know that what you know, that her head had fell underneath the wheel. I was a car thief. I was going to steal the car. I got in the car to steal it. I didn't know her head was lodged underneath the wheel. I would have had to back up, and had I backed up, it would have rolled over her head, and we wouldn't be having this conversation here today. I tried to start the car. Nothing happened. I didn't know, like you know, that she was underneath praying, Lord, please don't let this car start. I tried a second time. Nothing happened. Third time, I checked. It was a clutch. I checked the gears. Everything seemed to be working order. I tried a third time. Nothing happened. I grabbed her purse. It was laying on the seat. I just took the purse and left the scene. A week later, I had knee surgery, so I was off the street. I wasn't out and about. Had knee surgery, was at home, and been cooped up for about 3 weeks. And as you listen to Misty's story, she was out of the hospital in a week. So she was recovering from what my bullet had done to her. And y'all are here in Indianapolis. Would you say this is a pretty good-sized city? It's a pretty big city. What do you think the odds of I'm at home? I haven't been out of the house in 3 weeks. I'm kind of thirsty. I like Pepsi. There was no Pepsi at home. I figured I could get my crutches. I could hobble to my car. I could go down to the corner gas station and get a Pepsi. Life would be great. She was at home recovering from what my bullet had done, kind of cooped up, going stir crazy as well, wanted to go visit her grandfather. And our cars came face to face at the same stoplight. And she recognized the vehicle from the night of the crime. I didn't recognize her vehicle. I went on, get my Pepsi. She followed, got my license plate number. Next morning, detectives at my door asking me questions. I said, I didn't do it. You got the wrong person. It wasn't me. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even own a gun. Don't know anybody with a gun. Don't hang out with nobody. I had all kind of lies. I lied to Misty. I lied to the prosecutor. Lied to my family. Lied to everybody. Thankfully, the jury didn't believe my lies, and I was found guilty. 18 years old, I went behind the wall of the Indiana Reformatory. Still dark, still practicing witchcraft, Satanism, still doing things I thought I was tough enough to do. Tatted my body all up with devils and all kind of dragons and stuff on there. And how many of you have mothers or are mothers that are praying for their children? Keep praying. My mother was one that would pray for me. She'd keep praying for me. And my mother never gave up hope on me. I even had the nerve one day to tell my mother to stop writing "God bless you" on letters, because I said, Mom, quit doing it. She didn't listen. She still said God bless, but she always prayed for me. And on my 21st birthday, I was sitting in 331J at Pendleton in the cell house, sitting in the cell house. It was my 21st birthday. She said, Keith, I want you to listen to the country radio station tomorrow. She told me what station it was. I said, Mom, I listen to rap. I don't listen to country. She said, well, I want you to listen to country just this time. Listen to the country station. I'm going to request a song. I said, all right. You know, his mom asked me to listen to it. So I was listening, and the radio announcer come on. He said, this goes out to Keith, who's in Pendleton. God loves you, and Mama tried. And played an old song by Merle Haggard called Mama Tried. And as I was listening to them words, I was kind of in an emotional state, and an officer walked by at a perfect timing. He said, man, you're 21 in prison. Don't you wish you could go to the bars? I said, sir, I'm sick of bars. I know he was talking about the bars you go drinking. I'd never even been old enough to go to them. I'd been locked up since I was 18, and now I'm 21. But I was sick of bars. I was sick of them bars I was looking through. But what do you do when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, sick of them bars? What do you do? I'd already forsook God. I'd been running from God, hated God. I'd burnt Bibles, urinated on Bibles, spit in Christians' faces in prison, just doing everything anti-God, anti-Christian, called myself the boogeyman. So where do I go? What do I do? How do I change? I didn't know. I got out of my cell that night to go eat, and there was a guy down the range from me. I called him old school. He was about 30. He said, youngster, if you really want to change, he said, you're going to need to change your nouns. I said, man, change what? I said, man, I dropped out of high school, slept through English class. What's a noun? Somebody over here knew. Yeah. He said you're going to need to change the people you're around, the places you're going, and the things you're doing. I'm like, man, I'm in this place. I'm with you people, and we doing these things. I said, I'm in prison. I can't change. He said, man, people in prison change every day. People in prison change every day. I was like, man, I want to be a people that's in prison that changes every day. I want to be a changed person. I want to change. So what I looked at him, and I know he was wanting another question, but he said you're in a cell house. He said go to the dorm. I said, why would I want to do that? I've got a single cell. Why do I want to go over to an open dorm? He said, you'll be in a new place. I was like, yeah, the dorm's different from the cell. You'll be around new people. Yep, there's different people over there. He said, then you can choose to do new things. I'm like, wow, that might work. I put a request in. Little did I know that when I got sent to the dorm, my bed would be right next to a Christian who would introduce me to the gospel of Jesus Christ. He would tell me about the blood, told me about what Jesus Christ did, the sacrifice, that Jesus died for even me. Jesus died for the one, even everything I'd done, but see, there was still a problem. I was still innocent. I didn't do nothing. I didn't pull the trigger. It wasn't me. You got the wrong person. I'm locked up for something somebody else did. So I started arguing with God. Well, Lord, you know... What? It wasn't me. Who? Okay, Lord, it was me. So now it gets real. My lies and God's truth collided. The gospel met my lies, and my lies broke and shattered into pieces. And now my life has to change forever. So how do you tell Mom what you did? I can tell God He created me. He knew anyway. I'm figuring this will break my mama's heart. But on Mother's Day of 1996, I got a Mother's Day card. I said, Mom, I'm guilty. I pulled the trigger. I shot that woman at the phone booth. I'm in prison for something I did. It was me. It was me. No more excuses. I'm going to be a man of God. I'm going to stand up for truth. There's no more lies. I'm going to serve Jesus Christ. And I sent that letter, and it was like just so much freedom overcame me. And my mother, she accepted. I think deep down she might have known. She accepted and forgave me. But my mother, she was a God-fearing. She wouldn't lie, but she would tell one lie over and over. They say, how's Keith doing? She goes, yeah, my son, he's off at school. I said, Mom, I'm not in school. I'm in prison. She said, you better learn something while you're there. So not only did I enroll with Jesus Christ as a disciple of the Lord, learning of my faith, learning the Scriptures, studying the Bible, and accepting a responsibility for my crime, but I also got my GED, enrolled in Ball State classes that was offered in prison, got my associate's degree in prison, finished up my bachelor's degree when I got out at Ball State, graduated in '05. Got opportunity, I was, of course, called into ministry, started walking in ministry, got an opportunity to become a Department of Correction chaplain, which I needed an MDiv, and my first thing was an M what? So I Googled that, found out it was, so I looked for a school, found Indiana Wesleyan, went and I got my Master's of Divinity. And it was actually, I was sitting in seminary, been out of prison since '01. It was 2010. I'm in a seminary class, and go home to check my Facebook account like many people do, and I seen a name pop up. My whole body trembled. I knew who it was. She said, I know you know who I am. She said, I don't want to fight. I got questions. She said, I have forgiven you, and I'm looking at this going, wow. Here's an opportunity, but how do you apologize? How do you say I'm sorry? I attempted at the restraining order to say I'm sorry. Didn't get the opportunity, but now I've got the opportunity. It's just me and her. She wants my phone number. I sent her my phone number, and for an hour and a half, I heard the story that you heard. I heard what my bullet had done. I learned about her being underneath that tire. I learned that her starter in the car had went out. I'd never known that. I learned about she'd seen my car. I learned all these. I never knew any of this. I learned that my bullet that I put in my gun stayed in her body for 2 years. I learned that my robbery that night not only took her purse, attempted to steal her car, but my robbery took her full-ride scholarship away from her and her dreams to go to college. My actions that night, my choices, my darkness robbed so much from her. Panic attacks, all my fault. Everything was a result of my actions. I learned more what to be accountable for and what to be responsible for. And I got a front row seat to what my crime had done. And that's what we offer with Bridges to Life when we go into the prisons. We offer the offenders get a front row seat to what crime does. And I also have a front row seat to know what the grace of God does. I also know what forgiveness is about. I've been forgiven so much. I don't know where you're at with your forgiveness, but my forgiveness has a face, and it's beautiful. I can look forgiveness, and I often check, and she's not wearing a cape. She's a regular human being that did an extraordinary thing in Christ. She tapped into a grace that went beyond even my understanding. I know I needed salvation. I know I needed saved. I was dark. She tapped in to something that some people say, how can you do that? I would never be able to, but I believe if God can enable one person to do it, all of us can do it. We're all His creation. We're all loved. I'm going to close. We normally do question and answers, but we normally don't have time here, so I'm just going to state one story. You often say, well, how do you know forgiveness is real? And I'm going to turn this over to the pastor. We started doing this talk in the prisons, and I got to look her in the face, look her eye to eye, and say, I'm sorry. And she knew at that moment that it was serious and that I was real, and it was real to her. I didn't really grasp how real it was until we was doing a conference downtown at the old Union Station. It was Department of Correction conference. All the correctional people was there. You had police officers, you had judges, you had all the correction people. And we was doing a breakout session right after lunch. Commissioner was speaking at lunch, and we had a breakout session. And we had the room all set up. It was all perfect. Everything was good. And was waiting on the people. And Misty said, hey, Keith, you going to be in this room for a minute? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, watch my purse for me. I'm going to go to the restroom. I said, do you realize what you just asked me to do? She said, I didn't even think about it. This forgiveness is real. She didn't even think about it. This forgiveness is real. God bless y'all. Thank you for allowing us to share.
What an incredible story, huh? I mean, to think about the things we hold on to, the petty things. I had a girl in first service, and she was sitting right near Keith. And when Misty said, "And my shooter is here today," she goes, "Oh!" And then he walked past her, and she goes, and she took offense just in that short amount of time. So it's real easy for us to hold things inside, to let bitterness. Can you imagine where most people end up? But for the grace of God, Misty was able to turn to God, to find grace for her own life, to go through healing of everything that she experienced, and then to be able to forgive Keith. And you think how many times people are justified in their pain. I've met those people sitting on bar stools. They've got a reason for why they're there, reason why they're mad at the world. Well, so what? You can either sit in sadness, be in that place, or you can find freedom. And for some of you, you need that today. Maybe your story isn't as dramatic, but maybe you've been hurt deeply by someone. And you not only blame them, but some of you blame God. Why did God let this happen? Misty has a whole lot of those questions. But that's not what consumed her. What consumed her was finding healing and wholeness. And that's what God can do for you today. Why don't you stand with me?